All right, I did it.
Yay.
Okay, so I'm Tiffany Brown, and Kate and I met through Resource Generation. Kate was a constituent, as many of you know. I was the retreat director, and through a series of events, I ended up in socially responsible investing at Fresh Pond Capital, and was often pulled back into Resource Generation to offer like impact investing workshops. And one of the workshops that I ended up doing was with Kate and with Aaron Tanaka of the Ujima project, which many of you probably know. And a lot of the languaging and like the takeaway was like how people could organize their investment advisor to get them into a portfolio that was truly reflective of their values. And then Kate and I started to realize, like, we're spending all this time like trying to organize people to then organize their investment advisors. Why don't we just start our own business? And that we were like so much further along in the journey, I think, than a lot of investment advisors, being that we had come from the nonprofit sector and also had cultivated this like shared political analysis through our time at Resource Generation together. So we developed Chordata Capital, Investment with a Backbone. And the creation of it, we were very critical of the way that investment advising had traditionally been. It's like inherently individualistic, that we knew so many people through Resource Generation that had inherited wealth that would then go into their investment advisor and be like, I want to get into like, you know, beautifully socially responsible investments, and like, how about like putting Ujima in my portfolio? And then the investment advisor would likely be like, ooh, that's a little bit too risky. Like, you know, I just want to like preserve your capital, or, you know, would basically put the kibosh on it. And so Kate and I decided that not only do we want to offer investment advising, knowing that it's like a very individual journey, but we also wanted to offer something that beautifully complemented it. So we would offer this cohort. And that best case scenario, and we're really working on it, is like how these two arms of our work can also inform each other. So with our investment advising, we're outside of the public markets. What that looks like is investing in community loan funds, in some individual businesses, credit unions, and community development financial institutions. It also, with us, looks like a real attempt to get all of our clients into the same waves or cycles of investments. And so instead of like an a la carte, like choose your own adventure, where clients are picky and choosy about like, well, that doesn't fit with my theory of change. We're like, actually, here's the broad umbrella that we're coming in at, which is a commitment to racial and economic justice. And this is our best thinking as a collective of how we move through these different waves of investments. Another element of our investment advising work is what it is to move from the transactional to the relational. And so right now, with the first wave of investments that we do, we've actually also invested our time and energy of going down to the Mississippi Delta and building relationship with the credit union. And it also means that we went to the First Nations OESTA conference to build relationship with their staff, and also some of the different CDFIs that OESTA invests in. And then, as I mentioned, there's this complementary piece of our work, which is the cohort, which is a 9-month learning journey with 5 to 10 people with inherited wealth. And we'll share more about what that looks like later. The other piece that I'll say, and I think I'm talking a little bit more than I normally do, so my apologies, Kate. But it felt important to acknowledge like the premise, and I think a lot of people have mentioned this, like that in the way that I think about it, it's like there's our individual like personal political beliefs, and what that looks like is how we show up in our life and treat people. And you know, many of us, like we have a strong commitment to anti-racism, to being conscious of systems of oppression. A lot of us are thinking about and talking about reparations. A lot of us are thinking about buying local and like going to the farmer's market and supporting local businesses and whatnot. And then there's the philanthropy, the giving piece. And there we're seeing like Resource Generation has done such an incredible job of really supporting people to think about giving to grassroots organizations, to giving to intermediaries that have an anti-racist lens, and also the thoughtfulness behind like supporting organizations where the people who are most impacted are the ones who are making the decisions about like where the capital flows. So there's like all of this intentionality. And then we look at people's investment portfolios and it's like the wild, wild west, where it's like they're literally just devoid of values. And so Kate and I, our intention with Chordata Capital is to bring like the same rigor, the same thoughtfulness, and the same commitment to learning and growing as we do to our personal lives, to the way that we think about our giving, to bring that to the world of investment.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. That's beautiful. And I think it's interesting when we come into these investment advising spaces, like I think a lot of these values that we take for granted sometimes in kind of how we treat each other, how we're organizing or how we're giving are just like so, you know, if it's so actively either in opposition in the investing portfolio, or we kind of like don't even know how to begin to apply those values to the investing practices. And so the core principles that ground our work as investment advisors like include this commitment to racial and economic justice, which for us, it really means a commitment to looking at reparations, looking at opportunities for repair, and building relationships and understanding of like how wealth has been accumulated, where there's been historical harm, and where we might work towards repair together. And it also means for our work, especially as we're working with wealthy white inheritors, there's a need to commit to wealth redistribution. And what that means is reducing your total wealth over time. I think I really love the way that Deborah Fries talks about closing the racial wealth divide and how it's not enough to just grow wealth or support building community wealth and individual wealth for communities of color, Black communities, Indigenous communities. We also need white wealthy people to have less wealth over time. And so both working for that collectively and with individuals. And kind of a third branch is that we need each other. Like Tiffany and I, we came into this work together, like across class and across race, because we really deeply believe that this transformative power happens when we collaborate together to create strategies that are working towards repair and towards reparations. And that this work is stronger when it's this collective project instead of what Tiffany was speaking to in terms of like an isolated, individualized approach to addressing the systemic harm that's happened in our economy. Do you want to start with the kind of history piece?
No, I'm excited for you too.
Okay, cool. So we're going to do a brief history in terms of how we've been thinking about the history of harm in our economy and in wealth accumulation. And this is really fresh in my mind. I was thinking for Juneteenth, I had the opportunity to give a sermon at my family synagogue about reparations and about the work that I'm doing. And it was interesting to think about, well, how to position, I mean, I was thinking about that specific space in terms of talking to Jews of mixed class, but a lot of owning class Jews. But in thinking about the history of wealth accumulation in this country, like the fact is that anyone that's managed to accumulate wealth has benefited from racist systems. So whether there was a really specific act of harm that you can trace in your family, like going back and looking at, oh, like my white ancestors through the Homestead Act were given stolen land that they built their wealth upon, or my ancestors, because of the GI Bill or something like that, were able to access financing in a way that folks of other races, their ancestors weren't in this country. There's that kind of specific level of looking at the history of harm in wealth accumulation in this country. And there's also looking at like these broader patterns. I think for my family, like part of their story is like looking at the stock market or gaining a lot of wealth through the stock market. And that's not a benign process, even though we're kind of made to believe that you can accumulate wealth through an index fund or through the stock market, and that doesn't hurt anyone. Like, there are specific harm that's happening with those companies, and then broadly, like, as those corporations are building wealth through extracting wealth, like through their workers, through communities of color, through extracting natural resources, and those kinds of pieces. And in thinking about repair, like, we're thinking about like the financial instruments and like the investing opportunities that are looking at that history of harm and looking to address it. And so part of the work that we're doing is with community development financial institutions, which have a really interesting history that come out of the civil rights movement, that we're looking at the history of discrimination, financial discrimination, and like the present of financial discrimination, like racial discrimination in lending, and who has access to loans and who has access to those financial instruments that help them build wealth and help them build businesses. And so there was a movement of community loan funds, of credit unions, of these instruments that became like the community development financial institution industry that were built to move wealth to communities that have been historically looted and excluded. Yeah, do you want to talk about CDFIs a little, Tiffany, or?
Yeah, well, one thing that I'll note, because of the trip that I just made to Jackson, Mississippi, and getting to build relationship with Hope Credit Union, and then also saw when I was in Hawaii at the First Nations OESA conference, is that the CDFI industry is filling this like very much needed role in our financial system by offering the kind of loans that banks often find too risky. And at the same time, there's this like bizarre loophole with the Community Reinvestment Act where you need to have like brick and mortar institutions in these different communities in order for Hope to receive some of the donation dollars that they give, which help like offset the expenses of the CDFIs. So then what you find is that like these banks, just kind of like white flight, have like left the Mississippi Delta and like have left Hawaii. And so it really reinvigorates this commitment to really look at what it is to invest in this infrastructure that was created very intentionally to address a racist system. And I think it's interesting in the evolution of Kate and I kind of coming into our business and what we're learning. I think we would speak sometimes a little bit disparagingly about CDFIs, like, oh, you know, they're kind of run of the mill, or like it's no Ujima project or whatever, but actually feeling at this point this deep commitment to resourcing and looking at CDFIs as like an alternative to a bond. And yeah, but it's our responsibility as investment advisors with this commitment to racial and economic justice to support this infrastructure.
Yeah, and so CDFIs are, we'll probably share a resource list after this, and that will include like the Opportunity Finance Network's like directory of CDFIs, so you can look at, okay, are there institutions that are already set up in the communities or geographies where I'm looking to move money? And also, like, CDFIs are offering traditional financial products to communities that have been excluded. So it is reparative in that there's this massive history of harm and disparity in who has access to those kinds of instruments, like to loans, to checking and savings, but it's also not, it's not like building wealth in a way that's like redistributing wealth or kind of correcting these kind of deeply dysfunctional pieces around like traditional financial instruments. I don't know if that was like too jargony, but basically we're kind of segging here into these other kind of new economy, next economy investment opportunities that are also available and that often have a more democratic grounding or are providing like a deeper level of commitment to racial and economic justice in how they're rolling out. And I guess not to say that, I think there's a spectrum of community development financial institutions, some of which we love and believe have like a really deep commitment to economic and racial justice, and we'll share some of our favorites with you. And then some that are offering pretty traditional products to communities in a way that may still continue to extract wealth from that community to a financial institution. And so another kind of type of investing with a reparations lens that we're excited about are these loan funds, these community controlled loan funds that are being developed. Tiffany's talked a bunch about the Ujima Fund in Boston, which is, I think, the first like democratically controlled loan fund in this country. And that has a really beautiful commitment to racial justice. And then also there's projects like the Southern Reparations Loan Fund, which is part of the Seed Commons, which is this nationwide infrastructure that's being developed to support worker co-ops mostly, but also other kinds of cooperatives. And then to give an example of that, like locally, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, and locally here, the Southern Reparations Loan Fund is supporting immigrant justice focused real estate cooperative development here. And it's really powerful work that's building like economic sovereignty for a community that doesn't have other kinds of access to that type of financing. And then they're building, those investments are supporting cooperatively controlled both mobile home parks and also like an office building that they're renovating together. Do you want to share about the runway project, Tiffany?
Oh, yeah. So our friend and colleague, Jessica Norwood, created the Runway Project a few years ago. She uses national numbers of like, I think that maybe the average white wealth in the country was maybe around $150,000 and like the average Black wealth was 11,000. But at that time I was in Boston, and the median white wealth was $247,000 compared to the median Black wealth, which was $8. And so when I was learning about Runway Project, that was the context of like the racial wealth divide that I was seeing. And so how are you going to have any degree of economic self-determination when you have $8? Like, how are you going to start your own business? I think the stats are like that it takes about $20,000 to $40,000 of friends and family capital in order to get a business off the ground. So Runway Project created this model of using a CD, a certificate of deposit, which is something that Jessica, who's a Black woman, was like, you know, it's something that like my auntie could get behind. It's something that my grandma's familiar with. And that those certificate of deposits would then go into supporting Black business. And the model would be that it would be like friends and family capital, so that I think that it was lower interest rate, I think like maybe 4% or something. And there are all these other like beautiful nuances that I can't remember right now, but the way that Runway works is giving smaller business loans at a low rate to support Black business and to bridge the racial wealth divide.
Yeah, and so those are, I guess I should have kind of prefaced it with like, so we have these core principles around like, you gotta stop accumulating wealth if you're like a white wealthy person in this country. You have to commit to racial justice. That means looking at like reparations and opportunities for repair. And then we need to do this together, like not in isolation. It's not something you need to figure out like on Facebook by yourself. Like it's something we can do together. And then we were getting into like this field, this space, which includes like the CDFI industry, which includes these community controlled loan funds. It includes investing in the solidarity economy and local investing, which I'll get into in an example in a second. And then it also includes developing these like relationship-based opportunities for repair and really trying to embody at the, you know, like the interpersonal level, like this repair, and also at the systemic level. Because when Tiffany and I were talking about this yesterday, like, I think it's really beautiful and powerful and important for people to look at how wealth has been accumulated, either that they have access to or the institutions or organizations that they're connected to have access to, look at the specific path and the harm and work towards repair. And then also we have this like much broader systemic need for repair in this country. And both of those approaches are useful. And in my own experience, like as a person with inherited wealth looking to do that work of repair, it's like, you can develop relationships and like build accountability and support projects, but also like there's a need to balance that with supporting the emergent work that's happening in other places. That's not necessarily tied to like your personal story, but that's tied to like this country or this world. So there's something else you want to share on the targeted and systemic piece before I share My example?
No, I'm excited for your example.
Okay. So my example is like, I came into this work through like the local investing space. That's how I met a lot of you. And I had inherited this wealth. I was really politicized like by Occupy Wall Street and movements against capitalism. And I was getting to this new economy space and starting to make a lot of local loans. And I was kind of like, okay, I got this. I'm doing this. Like, this is what repair looks like. We'll go off of Wall Street onto Main Street. And I went to a resource generation conference like maybe 6 years ago now. And people were like, what are you talking about? Like, where is your racial justice lens? Like, are you thinking about reparations? Like, are you thinking about how this wealth was accumulated? We did this powerful exercise that maybe some of you have done of looking at like the history of this country and going through and looking at how racism and white supremacy have shaped who has access to wealth and whose families were like boosted or blocked in accumulating that wealth. And kind of had this like another round of really rethinking like what it meant to be working towards the new and the next economy and how crucial it was to include like a deep commitment to racial justice and to repair. And so I was moving money and learning about my family's story. My family accumulated wealth in Baltimore, Maryland, and through my great-grandfather had a hat factory, you know, and they owned the land in Baltimore County. Anyway, so they had accumulated this wealth, and I would go to synagogue like downtown, and we would go to synagogue in a poor Black community. And basically, Baltimore is one of the places that people like developed redlining, you know, like they developed these racist deed covenants, like really like strongly stratifying, like here's where Black people can live, here's where Jewish people can live, here's where white people that aren't Jewish can live, you know. And so my family had like been in this neighborhood in Baltimore, Reservoir Hill. And then as soon as like, I mean, it kind of not like they specifically assimilated into whiteness, but as soon as like they were allowed to kind of in the cultural context, like move into the county and move into like the previously like white but not Jewish neighborhoods, they did. And they scooped all their wealth out of that community and they moved to the suburbs. And, you know, this is like broader patterns of white flight and movement. And so when I was looking at opportunities for repair, I was looking at, okay, I want to be giving money to Black-led organizing to build Black economic power in Baltimore. And so I was doing that through giving, and I was doing that through investing in local CDFIs. But like, speaking of problematic CDFIs, like I was investing in CDFIs, and then I'd find out through my friends that were connected to organizing in Baltimore that they were funding like really weird housing projects that were gentrifying neighborhoods, or that they were supporting like charter schools that were really messing with like the local school system's capacity to like build power. And so I was seeing that like my investing work like wasn't having the kind of effect that I wanted it to have in the communities that I wanted to build wealth in. And so around this time last year, like Tiffany and I went to Baltimore, or we went to Washington, DC, and a colleague said, do you want to come meet these folks that are running a Black land fund in Baltimore? And I was like, yes, of course. And we went up there and we pull up, and we pull up to this gorgeous cafe, like this Black-centered, gorgeous like arts and culture cafe called Dovecote Cafe in Baltimore. And it was on the same block as that synagogue that I was bat mitzvahed at. It was like just like directly in the neighborhood. And as we were learning about the work that they were doing with the Black land fund that was strategic, like Black power building, Black sovereignty centered, like in that exact neighborhood, it was just like such a spiritually healing act to like come into a relationship and to be like, I'm going to make this huge investment. And I moved an amount of money at the time that I'd never moved before. Because basically what happened is I'd gained access to the second trust that I was supposed to inherit when my grandma passed, but I like needed for doing this redistribution work and for starting this business with Tiffany. And so I'd inherited this second trust that was about like $500,000. And I put like $250,000 into our business. And then Cole was like, we need another $250,000 to finish this round of work that they were doing. They were doing anti-gentrification work and fortifying these strategic blocks and houses in the neighborhood, flipping them, and then getting Black families into those homes as homeowners. And they did that, I think, with like 70 or 80 families. And so I was like, I'm gonna do it right now. The like check went through, the wire went through on Juneteenth last year. It was like all like this beautiful, joyous celebration. And then this year I had the opportunity, Cole like organized my rabbi to have me come give a sermon about that work, you know, so it like continues to be this work of like where there are opportunities for repair and for deepening that commitment and relationship and support. And what else did I want to share about that? Like that, because I was able to come in with that chunk of capital, like the Black Land Fund, they were able to incubate like a Black women builders cooperative. They were able to do their work in a way where they could center like the values of Black sovereignty and self-determination that they wanted to, and not like be out in the world having to like fundraise white people for this project, you know, which I think is like a really grueling experience to be trying to center like the core values of a community or a community's leadership, and then to have to go to like foundation after foundation after foundation, or like to have to go into these investing spaces to raise funds. And so that's like a very specific story of like a targeted act of repair that's still like ongoing. And then I think we were going to pivot, and Tiffany was going to offer something around like this more systemic repair.
Yeah, and I'll be really brief so that we can go into the breakout rooms. But first I want to point out one thing. Earlier I said that our intention is to move from the transactional to relational. And I just want to flag that in the story that Kate just shared, like that you start out with like the transaction of actually like, you know, writing the check or sending the wire. And then as we start to embrace this philosophy of like investment is relationship, because for this kind of work, it tends to be what's called like patient capital, or like a longer term investment, that then upon the second year, Kate is in relationship with this investment, so much so that is invited through Cole to come and do this sermon on reparations, because there's a level of organizing that needed to happen within Kate's Baltimore community there, and Kate could play like a really pivotal role. So wanted to flag that. And then two other pieces on just like philosophy. I already mentioned that our waves of investment, that the first two are Hope Credit Union in the Mississippi Delta, and then First Nations Owista. It's like a no-brainer for us, because we understand that like this country needs institutions like Hope that are offering that degree of lending in a very disinvested part of our country. And also that we need institutions like Owista that are focusing on building self-determination and sovereignty through people being able to develop their own businesses in Indian country. So our philosophy around return is unconventional. And we work with people who are accredited investors, so they already have enough. That is not a question on the table. So when it comes to investing in First Nations Owista and Hope, and when you can elect like what the return is for these investments, if we already have a shared political and social analysis and understand the history of this country, it's like a pretty interesting like moment of truth of like, how down are you really when you come to electing what degree of return you want? And I have put my foot in my mouth at some points, and other times, I mean, whatever, it's just tricky. But like, how dare we? How dare we ask for the highest level of return in some of these investments when we're already clear that in our individual lives and in our giving, we're already thinking about repair or reparations? Like, why have this like absolutely like rogue idea of like what you deserve in terms of investment? So the financial return side, we're consistently in working with our clients, just doing this level of like unlearning that happens in investing in finance, and really like with our clients taking the lead once we've done that level of unlearning, or coming in at 0% or coming in like at the lowest rate possible. And yeah, I think that's that.
Sweet. So as we were kind of planning this webinar, we thought it'd be great to give you the opportunity to connect with each other kind of in smaller groups, to both debrief a little from what you're hearing, and also to share what you've been seeing in the work that you've been doing around reparations, and to get more of a chance to connect. So welcome back. I hope those were great conversations. Were they good or bad for people? Good. I was gonna be like, it was a bad conversation. Well, we're like running really close on the end of time. I think we were hoping to have more chance to share, but maybe in sharing like a resource doc after the webinar, people can add to it the different projects or questions that they were holding, so people can see them. And I think we'll spend the last 7 minutes giving some context around the cohort and like why we want to do this work towards reparations, like as a cohort and as like a multiracial cross-class collective.
Yeah, so when we were planning this agenda, a beautiful segue was like that opportunity that everyone just had to, in small groups, like talk about reparations or work that you're seeing or work that you're involved in. Like that is the essence of what our cohort is like to take 5 to 10 people with inherited wealth that are doing work in their community or inspired by work in their community to then hold each other accountable and start to pivot from inspiration into action. So one of the ways that here's the flow. This is what we do in our sweet cohort. We start with money stories, which is a tool that we really learned through our work with resource generation. So in like a very like transparent, naming numbers, just like real talk, the history of wealth accumulation or privilege in your family. And as a cross-class group, because I'm participating and I don't identify as a person with wealth, also really talking about how I became politicized and how other cohort members became politicized. So we start with money stories, and actually, like, as we've been doing this work, one thing that has become really clear, we have, as part of the imagery of our firm, the bird Sankofa, which is this West African mythical bird, and its head is going back, but its feet are going forward. And this, for me, so much represents both the work that we're doing and then also with the cohort, is that you have to know what happened in order to move forward. So that's sort of the first part of our cohort, is money stories, decoding your brokerage statements. I mean, when I first started working at Fresh Pond Capital, I wanted to black out when I looked at like all the ticker symbols that represent like all these like horrible companies that like mean nothing to me. If anything, like instill like a sense of anger. So anyway, like getting on the same page and doing real talk with our clients, of working with them to decode like what they actually own. And it's like a really beautiful experience too. Like I didn't think about it like when Kate and I were planning to do it, of like what a beautiful act of like trust, because it's something that's not often shared with anyone outside of your family or like a trusted partner or like, you know, your investment advisor. So we do the decoding your brokerage statement. Then we were really lucky this year to do restorative economics with the Maca Agbo. But really what that is like developing like what's our shared political analysis as like a grounding for the work that we're going to do together. Then we do like a basic overview of the public markets. So many people have heard of socially responsible investing or impact investing. And this past year, Leslie Christian of North Star Asset Management or Outside Investments, she offered this webinar with us and really debunked like the power of impact investing through a public market approach. And so once we kind of have like this, understanding like what we own, what our story is, and like where things kind of currently are, where do we want to go? And that's where we have brought in a lot of our trusted partners who are leading things like Jessica Norwood of the Runway Project or Aaron Tanaka of Ujima, folks from Seed Commons, to start to understand like that there's this beautiful landscape that exists out there that is just like ready for us to start to invest in. And then kind of while we're understanding like all these beautiful options that exist, understanding too that we need to cultivate our theories of change. Like what is it that like lights us up? Like what is it that's going to be kind of like the guiding light as we move forward to start to invest in a really different way? So cultivating individual theories of change. And then one of the things that I really love about our work is like instead of it being just grounded like in like the theoretical of like, wouldn't it be nice if like we could make a real impact with investing, that we actually start practicing investments together as a community. So investing in a community development financial institution, making a local loan, and then doing a collective investment, which again, like just sort of like takes the individualism that happens so often in investing and like to offer this opportunity for people to engage with this content in community. In addition to those key pieces, we also bring in art. We do goal sharing, so we're all on the same page about where we want to end up at the end, and accountability through this community of practice. Kate and I offer individual coaching with folks in the cohort, and then also financial planning. So we are partnered with a really cool financial planner named Fong that I actually met through UGMA, an introduction through the UGMA project. And Fong offers financial planning because we feel like a key place to start is people need to understand how much is enough so that they can understand how much they're ready to part with. Kate? You're muted.
Sweet. Thanks, Tiffany. We're just about at 3 o'clock, so if you have to zip, we understand. But I think I would love to close just hearing like one thing you're taking away or taking with you coming out of this. Or did you want me to touch on this piece around Wall Street?
Oh, no, I mean, whatever. I trust you.
Cool. The one piece I'll touch on before we do this takeaway is that I think sometimes, well, for example, in this webinar from Law for Black Lives about reparations, like loans aren't reparations. Like there's a specific project of working towards reparations, which is looking at like, what is a systemic structural response to the harm caused by like government institutions, corporations, and families in this country look like. But that we can apply this lens of reparation, which includes like activism and organizing, and includes like giving wealth and doing this relationship work to our investment portfolios as well. And that doesn't look like continuing to invest in Wall Street, which is just perpetuating the harm that's been happening historically. It does look like investing in this new infrastructure and doing so in a way that's building capacity for folks of all class backgrounds to invest together, like in these alternative economic structures. Like wealthy people are really needed right now in these emergent forms and these emergent community loan funds to really like go all in, because we need that infrastructure for everyone so that we can pull like retirement savings, pull like this wealth building off of Wall Street into forms that are actually like accountable to communities and centering racial and economic justice. So I just wanted to like thread that needle through. And then, yeah, I'd just love to hear from you all. Like the one thing that came up either in your conversation or like from the webinar, and also it's 3:01, so if you have to leave, we send you off with gratitude for spending some time with us.